How you doing? I'm back. Welcome to Community Crossfire, another point of view. I'm your host, Norman Oliver. We have an interesting show. What we're doing for 4 weeks, Black History Month. I think we got like, 20 more days of Black History Month. They give us the. I have Sylvester.
Very good.
I call you Sly. So Sylvester Wolford, and this guy is really an extraordinary historian when it comes to history. So I'm honored to have him on. I want to thank Pastor D for hosting my show last week. Thank you so very much. This show is dedicated to my main man, my nephew, Sadiq Halim. Sadiq is doing a great job working with me, so I figured I'd dedicate this show to him. Also, I want to congratulate and thank Mark Seals, who did an excellent job in pulling together the class of 1973 and those guys who I thought, in my opinion, did an extraordinary job in bringing our community together. That's when basketball was at its height. I think I got a lot of my knowledge and understanding and appreciation from those schools: Wilmington High, Howard, Delaware, PS. I mean, there were real rivalries, and Howard went undefeated in 1973. Those guys had a tremendous impact on my life. I always see Brother Reason, I say Ike the Reason Why. I remember David Roan, Heads Roan, would come down to Bradford Street Park and just play basketball. Kenny Henson, who I went to and asked for an autograph and played a tremendous role in my life. You know, when I was running around in the hallways and he's telling me that you could do better. Eric Fuller, who lived over South Wilmington. Mike Miller, who I coached with at Howard High School. These guys I thought were institutions. Guys like Saddle Jenkins, who were like distant cousins, who went to Howard and played football. These guys you looked up to in our community. And I think it's appropriate, and I think it's incredible when we talk about this, when we talk about Black History Month, because these guys had such an impact on me personally. I remember Rashid Mustafa, who played on that team, and Joe Robinson. Those guys are obviously good friends, but I wanted to emulate him. You know, I wanted to emulate those guys. You know, and I'm not too big, too proud to tell you that. You know, going into acting and, you know, playing football and all this kind of stuff. And I'll tell you some of those stories, but I just want to congratulate those guys. I know Maurice Pritchard talked about it a little bit today. Jay Thomas, Stan Hill, my brother Abdul, who was a ball boy. Me and my brother Cisco would follow him. I didn't even know about scalping tickets until you went to those games, Sylvester, but that's what it was about. A couple of issues I want to talk about before we go to my guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I think our mayor is serious about cutting down on crime. If you look at what happened, in 24 hours, I've never seen this happen. They found 3 suspects and a gun. A cop got shot. 3 suspects and a gun. If I was a criminal, that would let me know that these guys are not playing. He's not going to let you go around shooting people and get away with it. But also what disturbs me is because we have a lot of crimes unsolved. And my heart and my prayers, because I do pray, have gone out to the officer. I think that's tragic. And I'm glad, and I feel sorry for the mother because I know her, but I'm glad that the alleged perpetrators work hard. But how do you find 3 suspects and a gun within 24 hours? And we have probably hundreds of unsolved crimes in our neighborhoods. I know one family who's lost 2 young black men, and they're still not, haven't found, they don't know anybody. And we find that it's amazing. So if you, I think somebody was telling me, you know, these guys go in, throw their packages away in alleys. You throw it away, you might get shot, which is, again, unfortunate. I think the mayor said he's going to go to jump out squads. I'm not sure if I agree or disagree, but I know that we have to do some drastic measures because people got to walk around, feel safe in this city.
Sure.
I mean, how can he deal with economic development and people walking around in fear?
Absolutely.
So I commend Mayor Williams for that. Also, if I can speak about Mayor Williams, because I usually support most mayors, even if we disagree. I mean, I don't have a problem with saying I disagree with them. But when I read the paper today, and the guy continues, or someone beat up on young Miss Coppage, and I've said this before, she's going to make mistakes, but we got to give her an opportunity. 25, 26 years old. She's been on the job for like, what, 2 months? Now they're trying to insinuate in a crazy kind of way, like get rid of her. She's been on the job for like 3 months. John Rago, who did radio at WDEL and was with the mayor for 12 years, probably been doing this for 25 years. And this girl has been doing it for 2 months. You can't expect that. You understand my point? Mm-hmm. And again, you get a young, and then here we go, comparing. Well, Mayor Williams is like Mayor Seals. But it's undertone. Mm-hmm. It's like a black quarterback can run and he's athletic, and a white quarterback is good but he's smart. There's some undertone there. So I tell Mayor Williams, keep doing what you're doing, and I support your efforts. I tell young Miss Coppins, keep learning and growing, and you're going to make mistakes, but overall, you're going to be okay. And I think that our community, rather than, and I didn't really want to get into this, but reading it, Sylvester, it upsets me. I never read, and I work for Dan Frawley. I never read, well, Dan Frawley's like McLaughlin or Babiars. You know what I mean? I never read that. So now, but as soon as you get a black man, why couldn't they compare Mayor Williams to Frawley? Why couldn't they compare him to Haskell? You know what I mean? I mean, why they got to be like Seals? Or why Baker got to be like, I mean, these guys are individuals, so why can't we keep it separate? So I say that to say, I could care less about what they say about me. See, I've been through that. I've been down that trip where they try to dictate and tell me how to think and feel. And I'm glad Mayor Williams is not playing that game. You know, he got a lot of work to do, and he's going to need everyone to help him out. Also, Marlene Saunders, who's an instructor, Dr. Marlene Saunders at Delaware State University, has an extensive resume. I was hoping that she would get that position. I think it's Department of Health and Human Services.
Child, Youth, and Juvenile Services.
Yeah, services. Yeah. And I think that we have to rally around people like that. It's a lot of stuff happening in our community, folks, but again, I'm warning you, ladies and gentlemen, your nieces, nephews, and we're going to have this conversation. Watch your kids or your children. I mean, then they're not even kids anymore. They're adults, 21, 25, 23. They're not kids anymore. Running around here with these guns. It's getting crazy. But we have an interesting show, and I'm hoping we're going to have Sylvester Wolford on, not just this week, but next week. And then the final week, we're going to have Kenyon Camper on to talk about some local history. And I hope that, I like Herman Holloway Jr. I hope I can maybe I can run Herman down. He's also a historian. We got a lot of historians around here, could tell you about stuff. There's a lot of people, Sylvester, talk about stuff about Dunleaf and Oakmont and stuff that we never talk about. Like it's only the city of Wilmington, it's only Howard, but there's Delaware and some other places that I don't know. So you got some stuff going on with genealogy?
Genealogy, I don't want to scare everybody off with a big word.
Yeah, well, explain it.
Well, basically, it's just a technique for looking for your ancestors in the past. Simplistically, it census information.
Is the phone around anywhere?
Right here.
Because somebody might want to call it, but go ahead. We'll talk. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's census information, but you can find birth certificates, death records, etc. When we're talking African American genealogy, basically we're talking about going back to the plantation, and that's the focus that I'm going to do here. As you and I have discussed, we as a people came out of slavery, and we don't have African names. Most of us have English names. Wolford is an English name. Oliver is an English name, and so what we have to find is where those names came from. And most of them come back from around the Civil War or pre-Civil War. So I'm going to be showing some techniques of how to get beyond the Civil War, how to determine how you became an Oliver. Okay.
I thought it was interesting because you did a study for me, and my Aunt Ruth Cone.
Sure. Yes.
You were able to find that it was a plantation, a cone plantation.
Absolutely.
I mean, and also like my family, you were able to find out, like my brother's name is Alonzo. my great grandfather, I guess that would be. You could go to a lot of greats. His name was Alonzo. Then you did the history of like Norman, the Hollises, the Olivers Browns. I thought that was fascinating.
Sure. These patterns always existed in naming, especially when I was doing the Congos. The name was Noah, and I was doing it with Trippy one time, and Trippy said, "Yeah, I have a cousin whose name is Ernest Noah Congo." And there were like 4 generations of Noah Congos in the Congo strain as you go great and great, and this becomes the pattern. And again, it's a way of simply determining their genealogy.
Is it easy? I mean, you see those commercials when they talk about ancestry.
Sure.
Those trees. Is that pretty much what you do?
It's pretty much what I do. But again, there's some quirks in this where, again, you have to get we talk about brick walls. Frequently, if you get back to slavery, you're looking for manumission papers. You're looking for a piece of paper that says, "My boy Joe," which is usually the way they read, is now free of all obligations. And then you have to find out what Joe's last name was. And so there are ways, even if Joe only had a first name, and most slaves only had first names, okay? The whole time they were in slavery, they had a first name. They only got last names when the Civil War ended slavery or when they were manumitted. And again, most of them would take the slave master's name. Some of them took the name of a previous slave master, okay? And so in order to do African American genealogy, you have to know what this pattern of last names is in order to trace folks back.
But isn't it true that a lot of blacks back then didn't have birth certificates?
No birth certificates.
I mean, like I think you sent me something about criminal records.
Sure.
Social security numbers. All that kind of stuff didn't even exist. So, like, how were you able to?
Let me go into a little bit of this because
I wonder if you could. Can you? Okay, go ahead.
Because you have to know basically the history of the country in order to figure out where we fit in. You have to know about American immigration. The Europeans ignored the Indians, okay, and just said, "Hey, we're going to kill them off anyway, so they don't count."
Can I stop you for 1 second? Ladies and gentlemen, I really hope that you are really enjoying this or paying attention to this, because a lot of times I know you enjoy shows where we just talk about crime, death, and somebody jumping off a roof. Sometimes you got to get into some serious stuff, and this is Black History Month. And I think this right here is really important. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sure. And again, I'm not going to get technical for too long, but these are some things we have to understand, meaning when the Europeans came over here, when Christopher Columbus came over here, he first of all thought this was India. And then the other folks came up and said the Indians are savages, let's kill them. And so there was immigration from Europe. This is a European country. As much as we hate to say that, and you say, what happened to the Indians? Hey, gone.
But what if a person wants to, and I think you're going to get into that, wants to go and find something on their history? They're looking at their tree.
Well, what I'm about to get into is our history corresponds to the Northern Europeans.
Okay.
And the issue is, and again, I'm sure you have some Italian friends, and you say to your Italian friends sometime, well, what about slavery? And the Italian friend says, my people weren't here when slavery existed. That's a true statement. And it's not that they have nothing. This is the country's history. The country has a blemish of slavery. So any American has to say this is a slave country. But there were certain groups of people who came over after the Civil War, okay?
Before you get into this, what do you say to the folks, right? Because there's a lot of folks say a lot of blacks sold blacks into slavery.
Well, from Africa, from the African continent, again, many tribes sold their enemies into slavery. Okay. And that's what was going on. But basically, it got out of hand. We're talking millions and millions and millions of folks who were crossing the Atlantic. Let me go into a little bit.
Good. I'm following this.
The Northern Europeans were the English, the Swedes, the Dutch, the Finns. And again, we have to say we are in Newfoundland, okay, the Kalmar Nickel, okay. I'm sorry, we are in New Sweden. I'm going to get it right. This is New Sweden. Kalmar Nickel came from Sweden, okay? And so the Swedes were the first people to come here to Delaware. The English, again, came over and took over much of the other country, and they brought the slaves with them, okay? So when we talk about slavery and who enslaved us and who had us enslaved, it was the Northern Europeans who had us enslaved. And so this gives you a map of Northern Europeans, Eastern Europeans, Western Europeans, and Southern Europeans. And the reason why I'm getting into all this detail is because we have to know who owned us. In order to figure out what our ancestry is, we got to know whose property we were.
Can you get a shot of that?
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so this is the map. And so we have to look at the immigration, the way it occurred in the United States. The immigration occurred because the English, Pennsylvania and Delaware, were given to William Penn by the King of England. He had all of it, okay, and he distributed.
And we named the school after him.
Very good. And that's how he distributed the land, and he distributed it to other Englishmen and other Welshmen if you're down in Newark. And so that's the way they distributed the country. And again, disregarding the Indians, okay, they just started dividing up the country, okay? When they got here and found out it was hard labor, they needed some laborers. They found out they could not get the Indians, they could not harness the Indians or imprison the Indians or put the Indians in chains, so they started importing blacks to do the work, okay? Other than the land, the most valuable asset in the United States were the slaves.
They were,
okay? And so we see, again, as we see immigration in the United States, the English came over, the Swedes came over, the Finns came over, and then around the Civil War, we had the Germans come over and the Irish come over. Most of the Europeans came over after the Civil War. We were here before the Civil War. So it was us and the English who were here before the Civil War.
What happened to us owning land?
Oh, we were property. We were land. We were property. We had, just like land had deeds, we had deeds to us too. Somebody had a deed to us, a bill of sale. Okay? Hey, you continue to have to say to this, but we have to educate ourselves about this. I mean, we can't just say slavery.
You know, last time you were on, you were talking about, and I was talking to, I think Dr. Williams about this. You were talking about all the land that blacks owned, like over Cooch Bridge, over that area in Newark and all that. So how did that play a part? I don't want to jump, but I'm just trying to bring things in perspective because we've had these kind of conversations.
You have jumped, but let me let you jump. There are two sides of my family. The Wolford side got out of slavery late. The Saunders family got out of slavery very, very early. The blacks that came over and became the Saunders family were indentured servants before slavery. And they ended up marrying white indentured servants. So they were mulatto. And they were free during the late 1600s. Okay? So one side of the family was free around 1680. And the other side of the family wasn't free until after the Civil War, 1865. So the folks who were free for generations went out and worked and developed money. The question then came, now that they had cash in their pocket, now that they had money, where could they buy land? In Maryland, mulattoes, Indians, blacks could not buy land. And many of them migrated to Delaware where they could buy land. And this is how my great-great-great-grandfather got to that side of Newark, because a guy by the name of John Griffith was willing to sell a black man land in Pencaken.
That's interesting you say that, because I was always under the impression that Delaware was one of the last where you could buy land and all that kind of stuff as African American or black.
The rules kept changing, okay? And frequently there were no rules. It was up to a person's discretion. And Delaware, as you just said, kept changing the rules. When they said, hey, we got it's getting too dark in here, or we got our quota of black folks, there were 2 bills in the Delaware General Assembly to prohibit blacks from buying land in Delaware. Okay?
Are you serious?
No, I'm not serious.
What bills were those? I mean, when were they implemented? Or when were they?
There was one about 1820 and one about 1850.
Wow.
See, Delaware still has the largest percentage of blacks of any state in the Union. And at one time, Delaware was hitting 30–40%. Free blacks had more free blacks. And we were intimidating the white folks. And they got to the point of saying, we don't want any more blacks here. We're not selling them any more land. And twice in the legislature, in the 1800s, before the Civil War, there were bills put through the General Assembly. They failed, okay, to prohibit selling any land to blacks.
Was this throughout the state or Newcastle County?
Throughout the state.
Wow.
Throughout the state.
Wow, interesting.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. You can go with your presentation.
And
I mean, you know, and I hope folks who are watching this appreciate the kind of programming that we have.
Sure.
You know, because I think this educates everyone, black,
Sure.
white, and everyone.
And the issue is not only you have to know what's going on in Delaware, you have to know what's going on outside of the state of Delaware. Virginia would not let blacks be manumitted, be freed, unless they got out of the state within 60 days. So if your slave master, okay, said, you've been working for me for 30 years, you should be free, I'm going to set you free, you had 30 days to get out of Virginia. Delaware then started imposing laws, okay, again, that said no more free blacks can come into the state because the folks from Virginia were coming here. And again, this is tit for tat. Somebody says, well, don't let them stop here. We got enough. And so any slave freed in Virginia had to go to Pennsylvania or New York in order to find a place to live.
I watched the movie Lincoln.
Sure.
And I was wondering who was our congressman or senator, U.S. senator, who voted to keep us enslaved. Do you remember? Did you do any study on that?
Well, the particular bill is that Lincoln was afraid that the border states would secede from the Union and become Confederate states.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Delaware was a slave state. Mm-hmm. And so what he was kind of going through state by state and said, how can I keep these states from seceding from the Union? So so Lincoln said, I have a plan. There were only 1,700 slaves in the state of Delaware. The federal government will buy them from you, $750,000, set them free. Delaware will be a free state, and therefore we know you won't secede from the Union. So it went to the General Assembly, okay? They voted on it, and they voted it down by 1 vote, which said they were keeping their slaves. The issue is the issue of the governors, and the governors were the biggest slaveholders in the state, and they were just determined they weren't going to give up their slaves.
So were we one of the last states?
We were the absolute last state to free our slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free our slaves. The end of the Civil War did not free our slaves. The passing of the 13th Amendment didn't free our slaves. It took the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which was the 2/3 of the states in the United States. It had to go to the states to be approved. So the states had to approve it before the slaves in Delaware got free.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Community Crossfire, Another Point of View. My guest this evening is Sylvester Wolford, one of the lead historians, in my opinion, here in the state of Delaware. I think he does a different kind of stuff. I hope you're enjoying this show. Go ahead. Did you want to keep your...
Well, we have covered, again, we're going to have to go back and get our history. So we have to know when the Polish folks came, when the Russian folks came, when the Portuguese folks came, so we know with which group we came and who we were owned by and where we got our names. And so that's what we are talking about. The next thing we want to talk about is immigration from Africa. After the slave trade ended, okay, the United States had 0 quota for immigration from Africa. This line here, do you see that line here? It shows you immigration from the continent of Africa. Before 1800, the slaves were coming in here by the million. When the Civil War happened and slavery ended, This country said there'll be no more blacks coming into this country, free or slave, up until 1960. So no folks came in here from the Congo or Nigeria or South Africa or any African country until 1960. The quota for immigration from, from African countries was 0. And again, this ties into genealogy. If you're looking for your genealogy, you say, well, my folks might have come over here, you know, around 1900 or 1910 or 1920. Your folks didn't come in 1900, 1910, and 1920 because they didn't allow black folks in this country.
So do you look at a guy like Alex Haley as a revolutionary? I mean, when he come up, you know, when he came in with, you know, Kunta Kinte and Roots and all that kind of good stuff.
Well, Alex Haley opened up our eyes, okay, and Alex Haley made genealogy look too simple, okay. It requires probably a lot more research, and Alex Haley spent years and years and years doing what he did. So I don't want to diminish what he did, but in order to trace your ancestry back to Africa, it requires, you know, a lot of work, and most of the Africans that were here for generations. And as we just said, they had no birth certificates, they had no death certificates, they had no tombstones, and so it's tough to trace folks back 2 or 3 generations with no birth certificates, death certificates, or tombstones.
With the way things are now, Brother Wolford, you have the internet, you have Google, you have, like I said, the ancestry, whatever. Is it, you don't find that being a little bit easier for someone like you or someone watching to?
Well, you're absolutely right, but you have to know what to look for. Okay.
And what do you look for?
I look for a plantation. Again,
how do you look for? How do you? Okay, my name is Norman Oliver. How do you look for my plantation?
Oliver Plantation. I'm looking for Oliver, Georgia. My name is Wolford. There is a city in Dorchester County, Maryland, called Wolford. So if I get on the internet and get on Google and type Wolford, Maryland types.
Why did you say Oliver, Georgia?
You pick every state. It didn't matter. It can be Oliver, Georgia, etc. You are looking for large plantations. Again, it's back to you. Back up.
Most of the larger plantations, where were they at?
Originally, they were on the Chesapeake. And again, we're talking Delaware here.
You're just talking about Delaware, huh?
If we're talking Delaware, folks, 50% as a shot came out of the Chesapeake. What was happening was that the original tobacco plantations, which was the cash crop, forget about cotton. We're back in the, again, early 1700s. The cash crop, which is the reason why folks were here and they were making money, the plantation owners were making money, was tobacco. The tobacco was grown along the Chesapeake, and the slaves were along the Chesapeake. Because they didn't rotate the crops, the soil gave out and they had to move tobacco south. When they moved tobacco south, there were some freed slaves over there, and there were some slaves that they set free because they didn't want to take them to Georgia or Alabama or wherever. Those folks migrated this way to Delaware. Some of them had been there for generations and had developed money, and they came to Delaware and bought land, again, because at the time Delaware allowed blacks to buy land. Okay.
Real interesting.
And again, you have to understand this to know where to start.
It's a whole dynamic.
It's a whole dynamic. Again, you say, and again, I know this now because I've researched my family. Both sides of my family came from the Chesapeake, near Chestertown, Maryland. Okay? And so then you say, well, why did they come from Chestertown, Maryland? Why didn't they come from someplace else? Tobacco. The tobacco was on the Chesapeake. The ships used to go up and down the Chesapeake, pick up the tobacco, and take it to England. It was a cash crop. Folks were making money. Tobacco gave out in Newcastle County. You know, there was no profit in growing tobacco. There was some wheat grown for flour, and flour was a cash crop too, but it wasn't as lucrative as tobacco. So there still remained, late into the 1800s, some viable tobacco plantations down south. And we're talking lots and lots and lots of money. We haven't gotten into